The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, turning Manhattan streets into rivers of grey. Philip Hartman sat in the back of his Mercedes, his hand intertwined with Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers when the traffic light turned red at Fifth Avenue. He was explaining the seating arrangements for their engagement party, only 3 weeks away now, when movement in the crosswalk made his words die in his throat. A woman was crossing the street, struggling with an oversized umbrella while managing a double stroller. The wind caught the umbrella, tilting it back, and for just a moment, Philip saw her face clearly through the rain-streaked window. His entire body went rigid. Rachel Montgomery, the woman he'd loved with everything he had 6 years ago, the woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only a brief note that said she needed to find herself and couldn't do it in his world. But it wasn't just Rachel that made his heart stop. It was the 2 children in the stroller, a boy and a girl, perhaps 5 years old, with dark curls that looked startlingly familiar even from this distance. "Philip, are you listening?" Victoria's voice cut through his shock, sharp with the irritation of someone unaccustomed to being ignored. Yes, of course," he managed, but his eyes were still locked on the crosswalk. Rachel had made it to the other side now, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians seeking shelter from the storm. Victoria followed his gaze, her ice-blue eyes narrowing. "Do you know that woman?" "No," Philip lied, the word tasting bitter. "Just thought I recognized someone." The light changed, and Marcus, his driver, eased the car forward. Philip twisted in his seat, trying to catch another glimpse, but Rachel was gone. Vanished into the city, just as thoroughly as she had vanished from his life 6 years ago. 6 years. The twins looked about 5 years old. The math screamed at him, but he forced himself to turn back to Victoria, to smile, to nod at whatever she was saying about orchids versus roses. His mind, however, was spinning in circles, returning again and again to those dark curls, to the way the little boy had been laughing at something his sister said, to the protective way Rachel had bent over the stroller to shield them from the rain. Victoria Ashford was everything his family had wanted for him: old money, impeccable breeding, connections that would benefit Hartman Industries in ways that went beyond mere business. Their engagement had been as much a merger as a romance, though Philip had convinced himself that respect and compatibility were stronger foundations than passion anyway. Rachel had been passion. Rachel had been the daughter of his family's housekeeper, the girl who'd grown up in the servants' quarters of the Hartman estate. The woman his mother had called entirely inappropriate. Rachel had been poetry and laughter, and dreams bigger than the mansion walls that had separated their worlds. And then she'd left. "The florist needs an answer by Friday," Victoria said, pulling out her phone to show him pictures of elaborate centerpieces. "Mother insists on the white roses, but I think they're too traditional. What do you think?" Philip looked at the images, seeing nothing. "Whatever you prefer." Victoria's expression tightened. She wasn't stupid. She could sense his distraction. "You've been strange all week. If you're having second thoughts—" "I'm not," Philip said quickly, squeezing her hand. "Just a lot on my mind with the Singapore deal." It wasn't entirely a lie. The Singapore expansion had been consuming 18-hour days for months, but it was also not the reason his pulse was racing, not the reason he couldn't stop seeing Rachel's face in his mind. They arrived at Victoria's family estate in Greenwich, just as the storm intensified. The Ashford mansion made even the Hartman estate look modest. 30 rooms of old-world elegance that spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries rather than decades. Philip went through the motions of the afternoon, shaking hands with Victoria's father, accepting congratulations from her mother, touring the gardens where the engagement party would be held. But part of him remained on that rainy crosswalk, replaying those few seconds over and over. Could they be his children? The question burned in his chest, but he had no way to answer it. Rachel had vanished completely after leaving him. He'd tried to find her, had hired investigators who'd turned up nothing. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist, or as if she'd deliberately hidden herself. "You'll stay for dinner, won't you?" Victoria's mother asked, already leading them toward the dining room, as if his agreement was a foregone conclusion. Philip checked his watch. "Actually, I need to get back to the city. Conference call with Tokyo at 8. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, but she walked him to the car. "You're being weird, Philip. Don't think I haven't noticed. It's just work stress," he said, kissing her cheek. "I'll make it up to you." But as Marcus drove him back toward Manhattan, Philip pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hartman," a gruff voice answered. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "Derek, I need you to find someone," Philip said. "Rachel Montgomery. Last known address was Brooklyn 6 years ago. She has twins, a boy and a girl, about 5 years old." There was a pause. "Derek Morrison was the best private investigator in New York, discreet and thorough." "This is personal?" "Very. Give me 48 hours. Philip ended the call and stared out at the rain-slicked streets. Somewhere in this city of 8 million people, Rachel was putting those children to bed, maybe reading them stories, maybe explaining why the thunder wasn't something to fear. Were they his? The question consumed him. And if they were, if Rachel had been pregnant when she left, if she'd kept his children from him for 5 years, then everything he thought he knew about that time, about her reasons for leaving, had been a lie. His phone buzzed. Victoria. "Dinner was lovely. Wish you could have stayed. Mother wants to discuss the prenup next week." The prenup, the engagement party, the wedding set for June at St. Patrick's Cathedral, his future laid out in neat, predictable lines. But those twins had shattered his certainty like a rock through glass. Philip typed a response to Victoria, something non-committal and affectionate, but his mind was already elsewhere. The Mercedes pulled up to his penthouse building on Park Avenue. Philip rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, loosening his tie as he stepped into the apartment that had been featured in Architectural Digest. All clean lines and expensive art, and not a single personal touch that made it feel like home. He poured himself a scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights blurred by rain. Somewhere out there, Rachel was living a life he knew nothing about. Somewhere out there, 2 children who might be his were sleeping in beds he'd never seen, in a home he'd never visited. The not knowing was agony. But in 48 hours, Derek would have answers. In 48 hours, Philip would know if the woman he'd never quite gotten over had left him because she was carrying his children. Children his family would never have accepted. Children that would have complicated the careful plans his parents had for his future. He took a long drink, the scotch burning down his throat. If those twins were his, if Rachel had hidden them from him for 5 years, then his engagement to Victoria was built on a foundation he hadn't even known was false. Because how could he marry another woman when he had children he'd never met? And how could he forgive Rachel for taking them from him? The questions churned through his mind as the storm raged outside, and Philip realized that seeing Rachel in that crosswalk had changed everything. The life he'd built so carefully, the future he'd planned so meticulously, all of it suddenly felt as fragile as rain on glass. Derek's call came 36 hours later, not 48. Philip was in a board meeting, presenting quarterly projections to Hartman Industries senior executives, when his phone vibrated with the specific pattern he'd assigned to the investigator's number. He wrapped up his presentation 10 minutes early, ignoring the confused glances from his CFO, and retreated to his office. "What did you find?" Philip asked before Derek could even say hello. "Rachel Montgomery, age 32, residing at 412 Maple Street, apartment 3B in Astoria, Queens. She works as a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital night shift, 3 days a week. The twins are named Colin and Margot. They attend Riverside Elementary, 2nd grade. No father listed on either birth certificate." Philip's hand tightened around the phone. "Send me everything. Already in your email, but Hartman..." Derek paused. "Are you sure you want to pursue this? From what I can tell, she's built a good life. Stable, quiet. The kids seem happy. Just send me the information," Philip said, ending the call. He spent the next hour poring over Derek's report. Photographs of Rachel leaving the hospital in scrubs, looking tired but somehow more beautiful than he remembered. Images of the twins, Colin with his serious expression, and Margot with her bright smile, playing in a small playground near their apartment building. Rachel's employment history, her nursing degree from a community college, the modest one-bedroom apartment she rented in a working-class neighborhood. She'd built a completely different life from the one she might have had with him. No mansion, no driver, no trust fund for the children. Just hard work and determination and apparently 5 years of secrets. Philip studied the photographs of Colin and Margot. Now that he could see them clearly, not just through rain and car windows, The resemblance was undeniable. Colin had Philip's jawline, his serious grey eyes. Margot had Rachel's smile, but Philip's dimples. They were beautiful children, and they were his. He knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic or proof. His phone buzzed. Victoria. Lunch tomorrow? Need to finalize the guest list. Philip stared at the message, then at the photograph of his children. He was supposed to marry Victoria in 4 months. He was supposed to merge their families, their fortunes, their futures. But how could he do that now? He needed to see Rachel. He needed to hear the truth from her own lips, needed to understand why she'd kept this secret, why she'd denied him the chance to know his own children. The address Derek had provided was in Astoria, a neighborhood Philip had driven through but never stopped in. Working class, diverse, the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors. He looked at his calendar. Victoria expected him at lunch tomorrow, and he had dinner with potential investors tomorrow evening. But this couldn't wait. Philip left his office early, telling his assistant he wasn't feeling well. Marcus drove him to Queens, the scenery changing from gleaming skyscrapers to modest brick buildings with laundry hanging from fire escapes. It was a different world from the one Philip inhabited, but as they pulled up to 412 Maple Street, he felt his heart hammering with an emotion he couldn't quite name. The building was old but well maintained, with a small garden out front where someone had planted tulips. Philip told Marcus to wait and climbed the 3 flights to apartment 3B. He stood outside the door for a long moment, listening to the sound of children's laughter inside, before he finally knocked. The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached, light and cautious. The door opened a crack, the chain still attached, and Rachel's face appeared in the gap. The color drained from her cheeks. Philip. Hello, Rachel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Philip could see past her into the small apartment, colorful children's drawings taped to the walls, a stack of library books on a worn couch, 2 small bicycles leaning against the hallway. How did you find me? Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. I saw you. Tuesday in the rain. You were crossing 5th Avenue with... He couldn't finish the sentence. Rachel closed her eyes. You need to leave. I need to know the truth. Mommy. Who is it? A small voice called from inside the apartment. Rachel's eyes flew open, panic flashing across her face. Just someone selling something, sweetie. Stay in the living room. But Philip had already seen him, Colin, peering around the corner with those grey eyes that mirrored Philip's own. The boy who was undeniably, unmistakably his son. Please, Rachel whispered. Not here, not now. Philip pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into her hand. Tomorrow, noon. The cafe on Ditmars Boulevard. If you don't show up, I'll come back. Rachel took the card with trembling fingers. You don't understand? Then help me understand, Philip said. Tomorrow, Rachel. I deserve that much. He turned and walked away before she could respond, his legs feeling unsteady on the stairs. Behind him he heard the door close softly, and then the muffled sound of a child asking questions that Rachel would have to somehow answer. Marcus drove him back to Manhattan in silence. Philip stared out the window, seeing nothing, his mind filled with the image of Colin's face, of Rachel's fear, of the life they'd built without him. That evening, he met Victoria and her parents for dinner at Le Bernardin. He ordered without tasting, smiled without meaning it, and agreed to whatever wedding details Victoria's mother suggested. But his thoughts were miles away, in a small apartment in Queens where his children were probably being put to bed by a woman who had every reason to hate him. Because Philip was beginning to understand something he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. Rachel hadn't left because she was flighty or immature or unable to handle his world. She'd left because she was pregnant, because she knew his family would never accept her children, because she'd chosen to raise them in modest circumstances rather than subject them to the contempt of the Hartman dynasty. She'd left to protect them. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His mother had made it clear from the beginning that Rachel was unsuitable, that any relationship between them would damage the family's reputation. What would Helena Hartman have said if Rachel had announced a pregnancy? Would she have offered money to make it go away? Would she have threatened Rachel, manipulated her, used the full force of Hartman wealth and influence to ensure those children never existed in any official capacity? Philip's appetite vanished entirely. Are you feeling all right? Victoria asked. her tone more annoyed than concerned. "You've been completely absent all evening." "Just the flu that's been going around the office," Philip lied. "I should probably head home." He made his excuses and left, ignoring Victoria's obvious frustration. At home, he poured himself another scotch and pulled up the photographs Derek had sent, Colin and Margot laughing in the playground. Rachel, exhausted after a night shift, carrying groceries up those 3 flights of stairs. A life built on sacrifice and secrets. His phone rang. His mother, Victoria's mother, called me, Helena Hartman said without preamble. "She says you're being distant, that Victoria is concerned. Philip, this wedding is important." "I know, Mother." "Then act like it. The Ashfords are a perfect match for our family. Don't jeopardize this with whatever midlife crisis you're having." Philip thought about telling her, thought about saying, "I have children. 2 beautiful children you'll never accept because their mother wasn't born into the right family." But he kept silent, because tomorrow he would hear Rachel's story, and then he would decide what to do with the truth. "I'll handle it," he said finally. After his mother hung up, Philip sat in the darkness of his penthouse, surrounded by expensive furniture and emptiness, thinking about a cramped apartment in Queens filled with laughter and love. He thought about the choice Rachel had made, poverty over pretense, struggle over shame. And he thought about the choice he would have to make now, between the life he'd built and the family he'd never known he had. The night stretched long before him, and Philip didn't sleep at all. Philip arrived at the cafe on Ditmars Boulevard 20 minutes early. It was a small Greek place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of strong coffee, nothing like the restaurants where he usually conducted business. He chose a table in the back corner and ordered an espresso. He didn't drink, watching the door with the intensity of a man whose entire future hinged on the next hour. Rachel walked in at exactly noon, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater that made her eyes look like the ocean. She'd always been beautiful, but motherhood had added something, a strength in her shoulders, a wariness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She slid into the chair across from him without removing her jacket, as if she might need to flee at any moment. 4 hours, she said quietly. That's how long I have before I need to pick them up from school. Philip nodded. A Greek woman with kind eyes brought Rachel coffee without being asked, clearly a regular customer. The small intimacy of it, this neighborhood knowing Rachel, accepting her in a way his world never had, made something twist in Philip's chest. Are they mine? He asked, because there was no point in pretending this conversation could start anywhere else. Rachel wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Yes. The word hung between them, simple and devastating. Philip had known, but hearing it confirmed felt like being struck. You left because you were pregnant. I left because your mother found out I was pregnant, Rachel corrected, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She came to the apartment I was renting in Brooklyn. She offered me $200,000 to disappear and never contact you again. She said if I refused, she'd make sure I never worked in New York again, that she'd destroy any chance I had of providing for a child. She said, Rachel's voice cracked slightly. She said that any children of mine would never be accepted by the Hartman family, that I'd be condemning them to a life of being looked down upon, pitied, whispered about. She said the kindest thing I could do was let you move on with your life. Philip felt the blood drain from his face. My mother threatened you. She protected you, Rachel said, and there was no bitterness in her tone, only resignation. From her perspective, I was trying to trap you with a pregnancy. I was the housekeeper's daughter trying to secure a fortune. She didn't believe I loved you. She thought I was calculating. But you didn't take the money. Rachel's laugh was hollow. I took $20,000, enough to cover prenatal care and a few months' rent while I figured things out. I couldn't afford to be completely noble, Philip. I was 26, pregnant with twins and terrified. Philip pressed his palms against the table, trying to process the depth of his mother's betrayal. You should have told me. I would have— What? Rachel's eyes flashed with sudden fire. Stood up to your mother, chosen me over your family. Your father had just made you VP of Hartman Industries. Your mother was already planning your future, talking about suitable marriages, about preserving the family legacy. And I was pregnant with twins, Philip. Twins. Do you know what that would have meant? The scandal, the gossip, the way your world would have treated our children. They're my children too, Philip said, his voice rising. The Greek woman glanced over, and he lowered it again. You kept them from me for 5 years. 5 years, Rachel. I missed everything. First words, first steps, first days of school. You stole that from me. I protected them from a family that would have destroyed their sense of self-worth before they were old enough to understand why, Rachel shot back. Your mother made it clear. Those children could either grow up as your shameful secret, or they could grow up with a mother who loved them without conditions. I made the only choice I could live with. Philip leaned back, the fight draining out of him. He wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at the injustice of it all, but he couldn't, because deep down he knew Rachel was right. His mother would have made those children's lives hell. The Hartman circle would have gossiped, excluded, judged. Colin and Margot would have grown up knowing they weren't quite good enough, weren't quite acceptable. Tell me about them, he said finally. Rachel's expression softened. Colin is serious, like you. He loves puzzles and building things. He wants to be an architect when he grows up. He's patient with his sister even when she drives him crazy. A real smile broke across her face. Margot is pure sunshine. She makes friends with everyone, brings home stray cats, wants to save the world. She's learning violin and she's terrible at it, but she practices every day anyway. Philip felt something break open in his chest. Do they ask about their father? All the time, Rachel admitted. I told them their father loved them very much, but couldn't be part of their lives, that it was complicated, that it wasn't because of anything they did. Colin stopped asking as many questions about a year ago. Margot still makes up stories about you. She's convinced you're a sea captain or an astronaut or something adventurous, not a businessman. Too boring for her imagination. They sat in silence for a moment. The cafe filled with lunch customers, conversations flowing around them in Greek and English and Spanish. This neighborhood was the opposite of Philip's world. Loud, diverse, unpretentious. And Rachel had chosen it deliberately, had built a life here that had nothing to do with country clubs and social registers. I'm engaged, Philip said finally, to Victoria Ashford. We're supposed to get married in June. Rachel's face went carefully blank. I saw the announcement in the Times. Congratulations. Her family is exactly what my mother wanted. Old money, right connections, appropriate breeding. Then you should marry her, Rachel said, but her hands tightened around her coffee cup. How can I? Philip's voice was raw. How can I marry her when I have children I've never met? When the woman He stopped himself. The woman you what? Rachel's eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. The woman I never stopped thinking about, Philip admitted. The woman who left me without an explanation and broke something in me I didn't know how to fix. I left you a note, Rachel said softly. I need to find myself. That note? That told me nothing, Rachel. It told you everything I could tell you without your mother destroying both of us. Rachel reached across the table, her hand hovering over his before she pulled it back. I loved you, Philip. I loved you so much it terrified me. But I loved our children more, and they needed protection more than I needed you. The truth of it settled over Philip like a weight. Rachel had made an impossible choice, and she'd chosen their children. She'd sacrificed their relationship, her own happiness, 5 years of his presence in their lives, all to keep Colin and Margot safe from the cruelty of his world. I want to meet them, Philip said. Properly. I want to be their father. Rachel paled. Philip, I'm not asking permission. They're my children, but I'm asking you to help me do this right, to not traumatize them, to not turn their world upside down more than necessary. And Victoria? Philip thought about his fiancée, about the engagement party in 2 weeks, about the carefully orchestrated future they'd planned. I'll handle Victoria. Your mother will fight this, Rachel warned. She'll do everything in her power to keep you away from us. Then she'll lose, Philip said, and meant it. I'm not 26 anymore, Rachel. I'm not the son who did whatever his parents wanted. I built Hartman Industries into what it is today. I did that, not my mother, and if she thinks she can keep me from my children, she's about to learn exactly how little power she actually has. Rachel studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she pulled out her phone. They have a school concert next Thursday. Nothing fancy, just kids singing songs about spring, but if you want to see them, to watch them without the pressure of an introduction, you could come to that. I'll be there, Philip said immediately. Rachel nodded slowly, then stood to leave. Philip, I need you to understand something. Colin and Margot are happy. Their lives are stable, predictable, safe. If you're going to be part of their world, you have to be all in. You can't treat them like a hobby you visit when convenient. They deserve better than that, I know, Philip said, standing as well. Rachel, I'm sorry. I'm sorry my mother did what she did. I'm sorry you had to raise them alone. I'm sorry for all of it. Don't apologize, Rachel said, her voice thick. Just show up. That's all they need, someone who shows up. She walked out of the cafe and Philip watched her go. This woman who had loved him enough to leave him, who had chosen hardship over his family's hatred, who had raised his children to be happy despite everything. He pulled out his phone and stared at Victoria's name in his contacts. Then he scrolled to his mother's number. There were conversations coming that would explode his carefully constructed life, but for the first time in 6 years, Philip felt like he was finally moving in the right direction. He paid the bill and walked out into the spring sunshine, thinking about a school concert next Thursday, about 2 children who didn't know their father was about to show up to watch them sing. Philip sat in the back row of the Riverside Elementary auditorium, surrounded by parents holding smartphones and grandparents with cameras. The school concert was exactly as Rachel had described. Nothing fancy, just children in homemade costumes, singing songs about flowers and rain and butterflies. But when Colin and Margot walked onto the stage with their classmates, Philip's breath caught in his throat. Colin stood straight and serious, his small hands clasped in front of him, scanning the audience until he found Rachel in the 3rd row. Margot bounced on her toes, waving enthusiastically at her mother, her joy so transparent it made Philip's chest ache. They sang about spring turning to summer, their young voices not quite in tune but full of enthusiasm. Margot forgot some of the words and improvised, making the parents around Philip chuckle. Colin sang every word perfectly, his expression solemn with concentration. These were his children, his son, his daughter. 5 years of their lives had passed without him, and the loss felt suddenly, devastatingly real. When the concert ended, parents flooded toward the stage. Philip hung back, watching as Rachel hugged both children, as Colin told her seriously about someone who'd missed their cue, as Margot chatted about the cookies that would be served at the reception. Philip was about to leave, this had been enough, just seeing them, when Margot's eyes found him across the crowd. She stared at him with open curiosity, then tugged on Rachel's sleeve and pointed. Rachel turned, her face going pale when she saw him. For a moment they just looked at each other across the crowded auditorium. Then Rachel bent down, whispering something to the twins, and slowly, hesitantly, made her way toward him with Colin and Margot in tow. "Kids," Rachel said, her voice surprisingly steady, "this is Mr. Hartman. He's an old friend of mine." "Hi," Margot said immediately, extending her hand with perfect manners. "I'm Margot and that's Colin. Did you like our concert?" Philip shook her small hand, marveling at how soft it was, how trusting. "I loved it. You have a beautiful voice." "I forgot the words in the 2nd verse," Margot confided cheerfully. "But I made up better ones." Colin hung back slightly, studying Philip with those grey eyes that were a mirror of Philip's own. "You don't look like Mom's usual friends." "Colin," Rachel said, a warning in her tone. "It's okay," Philip said, kneeling down so he was at eye level with the boy. "You're right, I'm probably not like your mum's usual friends, but I'm very glad to meet you both." "Do you like puzzles?" Colin asked suddenly. "I do," Philip said. "Do you?" Colin nodded seriously. "I'm building a 1,000-piece puzzle of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's very difficult." "That sounds amazing. Your mom tells me you want to be an architect." Colin's eyes widened with surprise and pleasure that someone knew this about him, that someone cared. "Yes, I want to build tall buildings that don't fall down." "A noble goal," Philip said, and meant it. Margot had been studying him intently. "You have sad eyes," she announced, "like you lost something important." Rachel made a small sound of distress, but Philip kept his gaze on Margot. This perceptive sunshine child who saw straight through to the heart of things. "You're very observant, but I think maybe I'm finding what I lost." "Good," Margot said, satisfied. "Lost things should be found. That's what Mom always says." Other parents were starting to stare, sensing something unusual in this interaction. Rachel noticed too. "We should go. The kids need to change out of their costumes." "Wait," Philip said. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly. Would it be okay if I took a picture? Just one?" Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Philip snapped a photo of Colin and Margot in their spring concert costumes, Margot grinning at the camera while Colin offered a small, serious smile. "Can we take one with you?" Margot asked suddenly. "So Mum can remember her old friend." Before Rachel could object, Margot had grabbed Philip's hand and pulled him down between her and Colin. Another parent, seeing the awkward moment, offered to take the photo. Philip put his arms around his children, and smiled for the camera, feeling like his heart might burst. "Thank you," he said quietly as they walked away, Colin already chattering about the cookies, Margot looking back once to wave. That photo became Philip's most precious possession. He looked at it 100 times over the next 3 days, studying every detail, the way Colin leaned slightly toward him, the way Margot's hand had grabbed his with complete trust, the way all three of them looked like a family despite being strangers. The conversation with Victoria came on Friday evening. He'd invited her to his penthouse, had poured her wine, had tried to find words that would make this hurt less. But there were no such words. "I have children," he said simply. "Twins, they're 5 years old. Their mother is someone I was involved with 6 years ago." Victoria's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. "You have what?" "I didn't know. She left without telling me she was pregnant. But I saw her last week completely by chance and Victoria, I can't marry you. I can't marry you when I have children I need to get to know when their mother is who you actually love," Victoria finished, her voice cold. "Don't bother lying, Philip. I've known for weeks that something was wrong. I just didn't think it would be something that sordid. It's not sordid, it's complicated." "It's a disaster," Victoria corrected, standing. "My parents will be furious. The Ashfords don't take well to being humiliated." "I'm sorry," Philip said, and he was. Not sorry enough to change his mind, but sorry for the hurt he was causing. Victoria left without another word, taking her ring off and placing it on his coffee table with a finality that spoke volumes. The conversation with his mother was worse. Helena Hartman arrived at his office Monday morning, her face a mask of fury. "Victoria's mother called me. She says you've ended the engagement over some children from a previous relationship. Please tell me this isn't true." "It's true," Philip said calmly. "And you knew about them, didn't you, Mother? You knew Rachel was pregnant when you paid her to leave." His mother had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I did what was necessary to protect you. That girl was completely unsuitable, and children from such a union would have been a liability to this family." "Those children are my son and daughter," Philip said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Their names are Colin and Margot. They're brilliant and beautiful, and you will never call them a liability again." "Philip, be reasonable." "No, Mother, you be reasonable. I'm 34 years old. I run a billion-dollar company. And I will not allow you to dictate my personal life or to treat my children as anything less than the blessings they are." He stood, walking to the window overlooking Manhattan. "Rachel raised them alone because you threatened her. She lived in poverty because you convinced her. That was better than subjecting them to this family's judgment. She was right to protect them from you. You can't possibly be considering—" "I'm going to be their father," Philip interrupted. "I'm going to be part of their lives in whatever way Rachel allows. And if you can't accept that with grace and kindness, then you and I are going to have a very different relationship going forward." Helena stood frozen, her careful control finally cracking. "Your father will support my decision or he won't. Either way, I'm done letting this family's expectations control my life." His mother left without another word, her back rigid with anger and shock. The weeks that followed were difficult but transformative. Philip started slowly, meeting Colin and Margot for ice cream, attending another one of Margot's violin recitals, still terrible, still charming, helping Colin with his Brooklyn Bridge puzzle. Rachel supervised these visits at first, watchful and protective, but gradually she relaxed as she saw that Philip was serious, that he showed up consistently, that he was genuinely interested in knowing his children. "They ask about you between visits now," Rachel told him one evening after he'd taken them to the Central Park Zoo. "Colin wants to know if you'll help him with a new puzzle. Margot wants to introduce you to her violin teacher." "When do we tell them?" Philip asked. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "Soon. They deserve to know the truth. But Philip, once we tell them, everything changes. You can't decide later that this is too complicated, that your world and our world don't mix. They'll be your children officially, legally, emotionally. All of it." "I want all of it," Philip said firmly. "Rachel, I want—" He stopped, unsure how to finish. "What do you want?" she asked softly. "Everything," he admitted. "I want to be their father. I want family dinners and homework help and school plays. I want to teach Colin about architecture and listen to Margot's terrible violin playing. And I want," he looked at her, this woman who had sacrificed everything for their children. "I want a chance to prove that I'm not the man who let his mother chase you away. I want to prove that I'm someone worthy of the family you've built." Tears spilled down Rachel's cheeks. "Philip, I'm not asking for promises," he said quickly. "I know I have a lot to make up for, but I never stopped loving you, Rachel. And now that I know our children, now that I see the incredible job you've done raising them, I love you even more." Rachel wiped her eyes, laughing slightly. "You always were dramatic. Is that a no?" "It's a take things slowly and see what happens," Rachel said. "The kids come first. Always." "Always," Philip agreed. They told Colin and Margot the truth on a Saturday afternoon in May, sitting in Rachel's small living room with its children's drawings and library books and well-worn furniture. Margot cried happy tears and immediately wanted to know if this meant they were rich now. Colin was quieter, processing, then finally asked if Philip was going to leave again. "Never," Philip promised, pulling his son into a hug. "I missed the first 5 years of your lives, and I'll regret that forever. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." By July, Philip had moved into a larger apartment in Astoria. Nothing like his penthouse, but close enough to Rachel's building that the kids could walk between apartments. He scaled back his hours at Hartman Industries, promoting his trusted CFO and focusing on the aspects of the business he actually enjoyed. His mother came around slowly, won over despite herself by Margot's infectious joy and Colin's serious intelligence. She would never admit she'd been wrong, but she started showing up to violin recitals and bringing gifts that were thoughtful rather than extravagant. In September, on the anniversary of the day Philip had first seen Rachel in that rainy crosswalk, he took her back to the Greek cafe on Ditmars Boulevard. They sat at the same table where she'd told him the truth, where their second chance had really begun. "Marry me," Philip said, not with a ring or grand gesture, but with simple honesty. "Not because my family expects it or because it makes sense on paper. Marry me because we love each other, because we make a great team raising these kids, because you still make my heart race after all these years." Rachel looked at him across the checkered tablecloth, her eyes shining. "You really want to marry the housekeeper's daughter? I really want to marry the woman who was strong enough to walk away from me when she needed to, and brave enough to let me back in when I proved myself worthy." "Then yes," Rachel said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at City Hall, with Colin and Margot as their only witnesses. No society wedding, no guest lists or seating charts or elaborate flowers, just Philip and Rachel and their children, promising to be a family in the most official way possible. As they walked out into the winter sunshine, Margot holding Rachel's hand and Colin holding Philip's, Philip thought about the rainy afternoon that had changed everything. One moment, one chance sighting, one decision to follow his heart instead of his family's expectations. He had lost 6 years, but he had gained everything that mattered. A family built on love rather than obligation, children who knew they were wanted, and a second chance with the only woman he'd ever truly loved. "Dad," Colin said, tugging on his hand, "can we get pizza to celebrate?" "Dad," Margot echoed, clearly delighted by the word. "Can we get ice cream too?" Philip looked at Rachel, who smiled and shrugged. "It's a special day." "Pizza and ice cream it is," Philip said, and they walked together into their future, a family finally complete.